Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. This Dhamma is for one endowed with discernment, not for one whose discernment is weak. This is the seventh thought of a great being. So we'll have some more readings on the topic of discernment, wisdom. And just to give you an overview of what I'm going to go through. First I'll be the Anguttara Nikaya, 8 causes that lead to discernment, an excerpt from that. Then there'll be some verses from the Dhammapada, and then some excerpts from an Ajahn Geoff Dhamma talk called Wisdom for Dummies, and from Meditations 5. And all the translations today are by Ajahn Geoff. So this is from Handful of Leaves 4. Page 351, Anguttara Nikaya 8, number 2, Discernment. Monks, these 8 causes, these 8 requisite conditions, lead to the acquiring of the as yet unacquired discernment that is basic to the holy life, and to the increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of that which has already been acquired. Which 8? There's the case where a monk lives in apprenticeship to the teacher or to a respectable companion in the holy life, in whom he has established a strong sense of shame and compunction, love and respects. This, monks, is the first cause, the first requisite condition that leads to the acquiring of the as yet unacquired discernment that is basic to the holy life, and to the increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of that which has already been acquired. As he lives in apprenticeship under the teacher or under a respectable companion in the holy life, in whom he has established a strong sense of shame and compunction, love and respect, he approaches him at the appropriate times to quiz and cross-question him. What, Venerable Sir, is the meaning of this statement? He, the teacher or the respectable companion in the holy life, reveals what is hidden, makes plain what is obscure, and dispels perplexity and many kind of perplexing things. This is the second cause, the second requisite condition. Having heard the Dhamma, he, the student, achieves a twofold seclusion in body and seclusion in mind. This is the third cause, the third requisite condition. He is virtuous. He dwells restrained in accordance with the Patimokkha, consummate in his behavior and sphere of activity. He trains himself, having undertaken the training rules, seeing danger in the slightest faults. This is the fourth cause, the fourth requisite condition. He has heard much, has retained what he has heard, has stored what he has heard. Whatever teachings are admirable in the beginning, admirable in the middle, admirable in the end, that is their meaning and expression. Proclaim the holy life that is entirely perfect, surpassingly pure. Those he has listened to often, retained, discussed, accumulated, examined with his mind, and well penetrated in terms of his views. This is the fifth cause, the fifth requisite condition. He keeps his persistence aroused for abandoning unskillful qualities and for taking on skillful qualities. He is steadfast, solid in his effort, not shirking his duties with regard to skillful qualities. This is the sixth cause, the sixth requisite condition. When he is in the midst of the Sangha, he doesn't talk on and on about a variety of things, Either he speaks Dhamma himself or he invites another to do so, and he feels no disdain for noble silence. This is the seventh cause, the seventh requisite condition. He remains focused on arising and passing away with regard to the five aggregates. Such is form, such its origination, such its disappearance. Such is feeling, such is perception, such are fabrications, such is consciousness, such its origination, such its disappearance. This, monks, is the eighth cause, the eighth requisite condition that leads to the acquiring of the as yet unacquired discernment that is basic to the holy life, and to the increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of that which has already been acquired. Okay. Now some excerpts from the Dhammapada. And one thing I would just like to mention is that it's mentioned by Ajahn Geoff in the intro that the sort of flavor or savor, the Pali word is rasa, of the Dhammapada, the dominant one at least, seems to be the heroic, sort of strive on with diligence. So it's good to bear that in mind when approaching the Dhammapada. So this is from chapter 6, The Wise, verse 76 and 77. Regard him as one who points out treasure, the wise one who, seeing your faults, rebukes you. Stay with this sort of sage. For the one who stays with a sage of this sort, things get better, not worse. Let him admonish, instruct, deflect you away from poor manners. To the good he's endearing, to the bad he's not. So these are some verses from chapter 20, The Path. First I'll read 277 through 279. When you see with discernment, all fabrications are inconstant. You grow disenchanted with stress. This is the path to purity. When you see with discernment, all fabrications are stressful. You grow disenchanted with stress. This is the path to purity. When you see with discernment, all phenomena are not self. You grow disenchanted with stress. This is the path to purity. And now I'll read verse 280 through 282. At the time for initiative, he takes no initiative. Young, strong, but lethargic, the resolves of his heart exhausted. The lazy, lethargic one loses the path to discernment. Guarded in speech, well restrained in body and mind, do nothing unskillful. Purify these three courses of action. Bring to fruition the path that seers have proclaimed. From striving comes wisdom, from not wisdom's end. Knowing these two courses to development, decline, conduct yourself so that wisdom will grow. Okay. And the final reading is reading from Meditations 5. It's the first talk in it. So this is an Ajahn Geoff Dhamma talk called Wisdom for Dummies. April 9th, 2009. And I appreciate that Ajahn Geoff makes the concept of wisdom easy to understand and accessible, and points out how we can apply it in our everyday life and in meditation. And I'll just read 2 or 3 excerpts, and I'll just pause between each excerpt. Wisdom for Dummies. If you read a lot of books about the Dhamma, it can get pretty confusing after a while, for there are so many different takes on exactly what the Dhamma is. On top of that, there are people who will tell you it's all very complex, very subtle. Only a very erudite scholar or subtle logician could figure it all out. With so many teachings, it's hard to figure out which ones to hold on to. Of course, some people will tell you that you can't hold on to anything at all. That makes it even more confusing and obscure. So it's good to remember that the Buddha himself taught the Dhamma in very simple terms, and all the teachings derived from a few very basic, very commonsensical principles. You might call it wisdom for dummies, the kind of wisdom that comes from looking at what's actually going on in your life, asking some very basic questions, and applying a few very basic principles to solve your big problems. When you use wisdom for dummies, it doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you recognize that you've been foolish and you want to wise up. As the Buddha once said, when you recognize your foolishness, you are to that extent wise. This may sound obvious, but when you think about it, you see that it teaches you some important things about wisdom. In fact, the realization that you've been foolish contains within itself many of the basic principles of the Dhamma. To begin with, this kind of realization usually comes to you when you see you've made a mistake you could have avoided. In recognizing that much, you recognize that your actions do make a difference. Some actions are more skillful than others. In recognizing that the mistake came from your foolishness, you recognize the principle that your ideas and intentions played a role in your actions, and that you could have operated under other ideas and intentions. You could have been wiser. The mistake wasn't preordained, and you've got something to learn. That right there is the beginning of wisdom. It's when you're willing to learn that the Buddha can teach you more about what it means to be wise. Start with one of his basic ways of distinguishing a wise person from a fool. If you're a wise person, you tend to your own duties and avoid the things you're not responsible for. If you're a fool, you tend to ignore the things you're responsible for and to focus on things you're not responsible for. This is probably the number one principle, because it cuts out a lot of other issues, such as taking a stand on where the universe came from, or if the universe came from anything, whether it's finite or infinite, what your inner nature is. A lot of what we think of as metaphysical issues get put aside this way, because you're not really responsible for those issues. And what are you responsible for? Your actions, what you're choosing to do. No one else can make your choices for you, so you have to focus on doing them well. This is why the Buddha says that wisdom starts growing when you ask someone who's knowledgeable. Quote, what's skillful? What's unskillful? What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term harm and suffering? End quote. Why are these questions wise? Because they come from seeing that the issue of how to find a worthwhile happiness is something you really are responsible for. Happiness is preferable to suffering. It depends on your actions. And long-term happiness is better than short-term. This is what's meant by skillful. So you need strategies and tactics forgetting the mind, to avoid the things that you like doing that are going to be harmful in the long term, and to get yourself to do the things that may be difficult now, but will give you long-term happiness. This too, the Buddha said, is a basic measure of your wisdom. One of these strategies is developing the Brahma Viharas. Remind yourself that you want to be kind to yourself. You want to be kind to other people. This is an attitude you want to develop because it helps you. When you're facing a short-term happiness that leads to long-term self-suffering, either for yourself or other people, it really helps to have this attitude of kindness already developed in the mind. This is one of the reasons why we meditate, to develop these attitudes ahead of time. Having the breath as a way of training yourself to be kind to yourself is an important aspect of developing goodwill. It helps you realize that you really do have a role in shaping your present experience, starting with the breath and then moving into other areas of the present. There's nobody forcing you to breathe in an uncomfortable way, or in a way that puts yourself to sleep, or in a way that gets you anxious and on edge. And yet we allow these things to happen because we're distracted, often about things that are really none of our business. But the breath is something that really is your responsibility. Nobody else can breathe for you, and nobody else can tell you what kind of breathing is going to be comfortable. You have to pay attention yourself. So this is another area where you really are responsible, and it does have a huge impact. If the mind has a sense of inner well-being, you're operating from a position of strength. You don't have to be a slave to things outside. You don't have to let the mind be shaken by things outside. You have a different source of happiness. You have a different source for happiness that comes from within. You're coming from a position of strength, which means that you're in a better position to act in skillful ways. That, basically, is wisdom for dummies. The wisdom for people who recognize that they've been foolish and that they don't want to keep on being foolish. That means that they aren't fools. They simply see that they've been fools, an important difference. They're the kind of fools who aren't really dumb. The real dummies are those who think that they're already smart and that the only wisdom good enough for them has to be counterintuitive, hidden essences, mysterious teachings that don't make sense. But the Buddha didn't teach that way. He simply taught basic principles for people who want to wise up. The first principle is to realize that your actions are important, that they make a difference, that they come from your ideas and intentions, and that they can be changed for the better. Second, focus on what really is your responsibility, and let go of things that are not. Third, train your mind to develop better answers to the question that focuses on what you're really responsible for, what you can do that will lead to your long-term welfare and happiness. Then take advantage of the tools the Buddha offers so that it's easier to give up things that you like doing that are harmful and to get yourself to do the things that are difficult but will lead to the long-term happiness you want. This concludes the reading.
Ajahn Thitapanno, have you looked at the new meditations book that we got?
I have.
I think, does it say, like, is there a talk in there that's a revisiting?
Yeah, I thought I'd read that one. That's, I guess you thought it was a good theme. So there's a Wisdom for Dummies Revisited. Especially if anyone has, well, it's a pretty common problem, finds it challenging to get up in the morning. He goes into a long section in that one about getting up in the morning.
There's a Lumpur Sumedho said, don't use wisdom when you're getting up in the morning. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Can you briefly say what he says about getting up in the morning?
Oh, jeez. He uses the. I think it's one thing he says is like, he uses this in several ways, but like the 5 minutes technique, like your mind's telling you, what's the point of getting up now? Because, if I get up now, 5 minutes later, I'm just going to go back to bed or whatever. And he says, well, you'll think about 5 minutes from now, but, just right now we're going to get up, He talks about how you talk to yourself and the back and forth between like the lazy voices and the voices that want to put forth effort.
Is he recommending having a conversation out loud? Or
Could, if it works.